Once upon a time, in a sprawling estate nestled on the lush plains of a wealthy Lagos neighborhood, lived a woman named Betty. Her beauty was only rivaled by her wealth, yet her heart ached for a treasure she could not buy, true love. Tired of the endless string of suitors charmed more by her fortune than her soul, Betty longed for someone who saw her for who she truly was. Enter Chike, the quiet, unassuming gatekeeper of her estate. With his warm smile and gentle ways, Chike seemed different from anyone she had ever known. He listened when she spoke, laughed with her, and over time began to break down the walls she had built around her heart. To Betty, it felt like destiny. She had finally found someone who loved her, not her wealth. But destiny often has secrets of its own. Beneath Chike's humble demeanor lay a past he had tried to bury, a dangerous history with a shadowy criminal organization known as the Vanguard. When Betty stumbles upon the truth, her perfect world is shattered. As love collides with betrayal and trust crumbles under the weight of shocking revelations, Betty must make a life-altering decision. Can she forgive Chike for the secrets he kept, or will the truth destroy the fragile love they've built? In this gripping African folktale, journey through a tale of romance, danger, and redemption. Discover the power of love, the weight of betrayal, and the strength it takes to confront one's past. Will love prevail, or will the gatekeeper's secret lock away their future forever? Betty tapped her pen against the mahogany desk, staring blankly at the towering stack of documents in front of her. Another business deal closed, another accolade to her name, but the emptiness in her chest remained unshaken. The sprawling estate, the designer clothes, the art collections, it was all meaningless when there was no one to share it with. "Miss Betty, the guests are asking for you," said Angela, her cousin, stepping into the study. Betty sighed, placing the pen down. "Another evening of false smiles and shallow conversations. Tell them I'll be there shortly." Angela hesitated. "You know, you could take this chance to meet someone. People would kill for a chance to be part of your life." Betty forced a smile. "People want my money, Angela, not me." The lavish dinner party later that evening was no different. Wealthy suitors lined up with charm dripping from their words, but Betty saw through their polished veneers. She excused herself early, slipping away into the quiet gardens behind the estate, longing for a moment of peace. As she wandered, she heard a soft, cheerful whistle coming from the gatehouse. Curious, she followed the sound. Standing there, beneath the warm glow of a lantern, was Chike, the estate's gatekeeper, meticulously polishing the brass gate handles. "Still working at this hour?" Betty asked, her voice cutting through the still night. Chike looked up, startled, then offered a sheepish grin. "The gate needs to shine, ma'am. Can't have the world thinking we're lazy here." For the first time that night, Betty smiled, a genuine one. Betty lingered near the gatehouse, watching Chike work with an ease that seemed foreign to her own life. "Do you always whistle while you work?" she asked, leaning lightly against the fence. Chike chuckled. "It keeps the spirits up. Life's easier with a tune." Betty tilted her head. "What's your tune about tonight?" He paused, then shrugged. "Nothing in particular, maybe about a dream. A small house, a little farm, and a family. Simple things." His answer surprised her. Here was a man content with so little, while her world was filled with endless excess and yet endless dissatisfaction. "You seem happy," she murmured, almost enviously. Chike turned to face her fully, his eyes warm and kind. "Happiness isn't about how much you have, ma'am. It's about what you value." Betty was taken aback by his honesty. It was rare to meet someone who spoke so plainly, without any intention to impress. She found herself wanting to know more. "Call me Betty. And you are?" "Chike," he replied with a respectful nod. "But you already know that." "Well, Chike," she said with a playful smile, "I might come to you for more of this wisdom. You seem to have plenty of it." He laughed softly. "You're always welcome, ma'am, Betty." As Betty walked back to the mansion, she realized she was smiling. It was a smile she hadn't worn in a long time, one born not of wealth or admiration, but of a simple, honest connection. The next morning, Betty found herself staring out the grand windows of her estate, her thoughts unexpectedly drifting back to Chike. His unpolished sincerity and gentle humor had left an impression on her. She wondered if he'd been out at the gatehouse again, polishing brass under the sun. Unable to suppress her curiosity, she decided to take a walk, an act she rarely indulged in, preferring the convenience of her luxury cars. As she approached the gatehouse, she saw Chike crouched by a flower bed near the entrance, carefully weeding. His hands, rough from years of labor, moved with surprising tenderness as he pulled out unwanted plants. "Gardening too?" she asked, her voice light. Chike looked up, surprised but pleased. "Just helping these flowers breathe, ma'am, Betty," he corrected himself quickly. "They give a lot, you know. Beauty, air, a bit of peace. Least I can do is take care of them." Betty smiled, stepping closer. "I never thought of it that way. I usually just pay someone to do the work." Chike chuckled. "Nothing wrong with that, but you missed the connection. There's something special about getting your hands dirty." He glanced at her manicured nails and added with a playful grin, "Though I can't imagine you in the dirt." She laughed, an unrestrained sound that startled her. "You'd be surprised, Chike. Maybe one day I'll prove you wrong." They spoke for nearly an hour, their conversation weaving through topics of life, family, and dreams. For the first time in years, Betty felt truly seen, not as the wealthy heiress or the business mogul, but as a person. When she returned to the mansion, she felt lighter. She didn't know what it was about Chike, but she knew she wanted to see him again. By the end of the week, Betty's visits to the gatehouse had become a regular occurrence. She found herself drawn to Chike's grounded perspective on life, his unpretentious charm, and his quiet wisdom. It was refreshing, a stark contrast to the opulent but superficial world she had grown weary of. One afternoon, as she sat on the low stone wall near the gatehouse, Chike recounted tales of his childhood. "We didn't have much," he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "But my mother always said love and laughter filled the gaps money couldn't reach." Betty listened intently, fascinated by his humility. "It sounds peaceful," she admitted. "I can't remember a time in my life that wasn't filled with pressure and expectations." Chike gave her a curious look. "Pressure to be what?" "To be perfect," Betty replied, her voice softer now. "The perfect daughter, the perfect businesswoman, the perfect heiress. It's exhausting, really." Before Chike could respond, a sharp voice interrupted their conversation. "Betty, what on earth are you doing here?" Betty turned to see Angela, her cousin, standing with arms crossed, a disapproving frown etched on her face. Angela's gaze flicked to Chike, and her disdain was evident. "I could ask you the same," Betty retorted, trying to keep her composure. Angela ignored her. "You shouldn't waste your time here," she said bluntly, nodding toward Chike. "People are already talking. It's unseemly for someone like you." Betty's jaw tightened, but Chike spoke before she could. "Don't blame her, ma'am. She's just being kind." Angela scoffed, but didn't press further. As she walked away, Betty felt a pang of anger and embarrassment, but Chike's calm expression eased her frustration. "Don't mind her," Betty said firmly. "I don't." "Neither do I," Chike replied with a small smile. "But the world isn't always kind to friendships like ours." Betty's heart sank at the truth of his words, but she vowed silently that their unconventional bond was worth protecting. Despite Angela's warning, Betty continued visiting the gatehouse, her bond with Chike deepening with every encounter. One crisp evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the estate in warm hues of gold and pink, Betty found herself sitting beside Chike on a weathered wooden bench just outside the gatehouse. "You're not afraid of what people might say?" Chike asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Betty shrugged, though his question struck a chord. "People will always talk, Chike. I've learned that no matter what I do, someone will have an opinion. I'd rather do what makes me happy." "And does this make you happy?" he asked, his voice quiet but searching. Betty hesitated, meeting his gaze. His dark eyes were steady, filled with a warmth that made her heart flutter. "It does," she admitted softly. Chike looked away, a small, almost shy smile tugging at his lips. "You're a brave woman, Betty. Braver than most people I've met." She laughed lightly. "I don't feel brave. I just like being here. With you." The words hung between them, carrying a weight neither could deny. Chike shifted slightly, his hands clasped tightly as if grappling with unspoken thoughts. "Betty," he began, his tone hesitant, "you know our lives are different. I'm just a gatekeeper, and you—" She cut him off gently. "And I'm just a woman who's tired of being defined by what others see on the surface." For the first time, Chike allowed himself to smile fully. They sat in silence after that, the unspoken connection between them growing stronger. Betty's heart raced as she realized the truth. She was falling for him. As the days turned into weeks, Chike grew increasingly wary of the growing closeness between him and Betty. Though he cherished their time together, a persistent voice in his mind warned him against what was unfolding. Their worlds were too far apart, and he feared she might eventually regret her choice. One evening, as Betty approached the gatehouse, she noticed Chike's unusually somber expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, taking a seat beside him on the bench. Chike sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Betty, I think maybe we should stop meeting like this." The words hit her like a cold wind. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're an extraordinary woman, Betty," Chike began, his tone gentle but firm. "But people are talking. I don't want you to get hurt because of me." Betty frowned, anger flaring in her chest. "You're worried about what people think? Chike, I don't care about their opinions." "It's not just about opinions," Chike replied, his voice rising slightly. "It's about reality. Your life is different from mine, Betty. This can't—" "Stop," she interrupted, her eyes glistening. "Don't tell me what can or can't happen. Let me decide what's right for me." Chike looked at her, his resolve softening under the intensity of her gaze. "I just don't want to see you hurt," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Betty reached for his hand, holding it tightly. "Then stop pushing me away. Let's face whatever comes together." For a moment, the silence between them was heavy, but Chike finally nodded, a small smile breaking through. "All right," he said softly. "We'll try." The estate's garden was alive with the vibrant colors of blooming flowers and the soothing rustle of leaves. Betty had invited Chike to walk with her there one evening, a gesture that felt almost rebellious given their growing relationship's precariousness. "I've never been inside this part of the estate," Chike admitted, his eyes wide as he took in the beauty surrounding them. Betty smiled, enjoying his wonder. "It's one of my favorite places. It's quiet here, peaceful." As they walked, Betty pointed out different flowers, sharing small anecdotes about how her late mother had planted many of them. Chike listened intently, his admiration for Betty growing with every word she spoke. "You're not what I expected," he said after a while, his voice soft but thoughtful. "What did you expect?" Betty asked, turning to him with a curious smile. "I don't know," he admitted. "Someone more distant, more untouchable. But you're kind, Betty, real." Her heart warmed at his words. "You make it easy to be real, Chike. With you, I don't feel like I have to pretend." They stopped near a small fountain, the water's gentle trickle filling the air. Chike looked at her, his expression serious. "You deserve someone who can give you everything, Betty. And I don't," she said quickly, placing a hand on his arm. "Don't say you're not enough. You are. Can't you see that?" Chike hesitated, but the vulnerability in her eyes silenced his doubts. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. The whispers began slowly, weaving their way through the estate like an unwelcome wind. The staff, long accustomed to Betty's untouchable sophistication, found her growing closeness to Chike both baffling and scandalous. "Did you see her at the gatehouse again?" one maid whispered to another in the kitchen. "They were laughing like old friends," the other replied, shaking her head. What could she possibly see in him? The rumors didn't stop at the staff quarters. Angela, always watchful, began to notice the subtle but telling changes in Betty's routine. She cornered Betty one afternoon in the library, her expression a mixture of curiosity and judgment. "Betty," Angela began, her tone deceptively casual, "you've been spending quite a lot of time at the gatehouse lately." Betty didn't look up from her book. "Is that a problem?" Angela sighed, closing the heavy library door behind her. "You know it is. People are talking. You're not just anyone, Betty. Your actions reflect on the family, on our reputation." Betty finally met her cousin's gaze, her eyes sharp. "I'm tired of living for other people's approval, Angela. For once, I'm doing something that makes me happy." "But with him?" Angela's voice dropped to a whisper. "He's not your equal. You know that, don't you?" Betty's jaw tightened. "Chike is kind, honest, and real, qualities most people in our circle lack. If that's not enough for you, it's more than enough for me." Angela's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue further. Betty's determination was unshakable, and Angela knew it. As Angela left the library, Betty sighed heavily. She had no regrets about her feelings for Chike, but the growing scrutiny around their relationship was becoming impossible to ignore. The estate felt different now, alive with tension and unspoken words. Betty continued to see Chike, their bond growing deeper despite the murmurs that followed her everywhere. But beneath their shared moments of joy, an unease began to creep into their interactions, especially when Chike seemed distracted, even evasive at times. One evening, as Betty made her way to the gatehouse, she caught sight of Chike hurriedly slipping something into his pocket. His movements were quick, but Betty's sharp eyes didn't miss the flash of a worn envelope. "What's that?" she asked casually, stepping closer. Chike froze, his easy smile faltering. "Oh, nothing important," he said, brushing it off. But Betty wasn't convinced. "You've been acting strange lately. Is there something you're not telling me?" Chike hesitated, his expression conflicted. "It's nothing to worry about, Betty. Really." Frustrated but unwilling to push him further, Betty let it go, for now. But that night, as she lay in her luxurious bed staring at the ornate ceiling, doubt gnawed at her. What could Chike be hiding? The next day, Betty decided to investigate. She waited until Chike left the gatehouse for his midday rounds before slipping inside. The small room was simple, filled with little more than a cot, a table, and a few personal belongings. Her eyes scanned the space until they landed on a small wooden box tucked under the bed. Her heart raced as she opened it. Inside were several faded photographs and letters, all addressed to Chike but signed by someone she didn't recognize. The most recent letter, its paper slightly crumpled, read, "Chike, I can't keep this secret much longer. You owe her the truth before she finds out another way." Betty's hands trembled as she clutched the letter. Who was writing to Chike? And what truth was he hiding from her? She found him at the garden, watering the flower beds as usual. The sight of him, calm, unassuming, filled her with a mix of anger and sorrow. "Chike," she called, her voice sharper than she intended. He looked up, startled. "Betty, what's wrong?" She held up the crumpled letter, her eyes blazing. "What's this?" Chike's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. He set the watering can down, his hands visibly shaking. "Betty, where did you find that?" "In your room," she admitted, not caring about the breach of privacy. "Who wrote this, and what are they talking about? What truth are you hiding from me?" Chike ran a hand over his face, his composure crumbling. "It's complicated," he began, but Betty cut him off. "Don't you dare say that," she snapped. "I've opened my heart to you, defended you against everyone who doubted us. I deserve the truth, Chike." He stared at her for a long moment, his shoulders slumping under the weight of her words. "All right," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll tell you everything, but please, Betty, sit down." Betty didn't move. "Start talking." Chike took a deep breath, his eyes filled with anguish. "The letters are from someone I used to know, someone who knows things about my past that I've tried to leave behind. Betty, before I came here, I wasn't just a gatekeeper. I was." He hesitated, and Betty's heart pounded as she waited for his next words. Chike's voice trembled as he continued. "Before I came here, I wasn't just a simple man looking for honest work. I was part of something dangerous." Betty's brows furrowed, confusion mingling with dread. "What do you mean, dangerous?" "I was involved with a group, an organization," Chike said, his gaze fixed on the ground. "We called ourselves the Vanguard. On the surface, we claimed to fight for justice, for the rights of the oppressed. But the truth is we were no better than the people we claimed to oppose." Betty felt the blood drain from her face. "What kind of things did you do, Chike?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chike hesitated, the weight of his confession bearing down on him. "We smuggled weapons, planned uprisings, and at our worst, caused harm to innocent people. I didn't realize how deep I was until it was too late." Betty took a step back, her mind racing. The man she thought she knew, the kind, humble gatekeeper, had been part of something violent and chaotic. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I didn't want to lose you," Chike admitted, his voice raw with emotion. "When I left that life behind, I promised myself I'd start over. This job, this estate, it's my chance to be someone better. But the past doesn't stay buried, Betty. It always finds a way back." "And these letters?" Betty held up the one she'd found. "They're from a former comrade," Chike said. "He's threatening to expose me unless I go back." "But I can't, Betty. I won't." Betty's chest tightened as she struggled to process his words. She wanted to run, to retreat to the safety of her world, but something in Chike's eyes stopped her. "What are you going to do?" she asked finally. "I don't know," Chike admitted, "but if you want to walk away, I'll understand." Betty stared at him, her heart torn. Could she trust him, knowing the darkness he once lived in? Or was this the end of their fragile love story? Betty returned to the mansion that night, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. She replayed Chike's confession over and over, struggling to reconcile the man she had fallen for with the man he used to be. Her cousin Angela found her pacing in the grand sitting room. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Angela remarked, sipping her tea. Betty glanced at her but said nothing. "It's about him, isn't it?" Angela pressed, setting her cup down. "I warned you, Betty. Men like him always have skeletons in their closet. You should let him go before it's too late." "Not everyone can afford to live a perfect life, Angela," Betty snapped, her frustration boiling over. "Not everyone gets to sit in ivory towers and pretend they're above it all." Angela blinked, momentarily stunned by her cousin's outburst. "I'm only trying to protect you." Betty sighed, collapsing onto the couch. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "Then ask yourself this," Angela said. "Can you live with the truth of who he is? Because if you can't, there's no point in pretending." That night, as Betty lay in bed, Angela's words echoed in her mind. Could she live with Chike's past? More importantly, could she trust him not to hurt her in the future? The next morning, Betty made her decision. She would confront Chike one last time and demand the truth about his intentions and hers. The morning air was heavy with unspoken tension as Betty made her way to the gatehouse. Her heart pounded with every step, each beat a reminder of the decision she had to make. When she arrived, Chike was seated on the bench outside, his head bowed and his shoulders slumped as though he carried the weight of the world. "Chike," Betty called, her voice firm but tinged with emotion. He looked up, his eyes widening at the sight of her. "Betty," he said softly, standing as if preparing for a storm. Betty didn't waste time. "I need to know everything, not just the pieces you think I can handle, but the whole truth. Who were you, Chike? And who are you now?" Chike hesitated, then gestured for her to sit beside him. When she didn't move, he sighed and began to speak. "The Vanguard wasn't just a group, it was a way of life," he explained. "We operated in the shadows, doing things that seemed justified at the time, but left scars on my soul. I stayed because I thought I was fighting for something bigger than myself, but in the end, I was just a pawn." Betty crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. "And what about now? Are they still after you?" Chike nodded grimly. "Yes, the letters you found, they're a warning. They want me back, and if I refuse, they'll make sure my past ruins me and anyone close to me." Her heart clenched at his words. "So you think being with me puts me in danger?" "I know it does," Chike admitted. "That's why I wanted to keep my distance, but I couldn't. I care about you too much." Betty took a deep breath, her mind racing. "You should have told me this sooner, Chike. You should have trusted me." "I didn't want to lose you," he said, his voice breaking. "But now I see that hiding the truth only pushes you further away." Betty's anger softened as she saw the pain in his eyes. "We're not done, Chike," she said firmly. "But if we're going to have any chance, we have to face this together. No more secrets, no more lies." Chike stared at her in disbelief. "You'd still stand by me, even knowing all this?" "Yes," Betty said, her voice steady. "But you have to promise me something. You'll fight to stay out of their grasp. Whatever it takes, we'll find a way." For the first time in days, a glimmer of hope returned to Chike's face. "I'll do whatever it takes," he vowed. With their bond tentatively restored, Betty and Chike set out to find a way to protect themselves from the shadows of his past. Betty's first step was to consult a trusted family lawyer, Mr. Adewale, who had been discreetly handling sensitive matters for the family for years. Mr. Adewale raised an eyebrow as Betty explained the situation. "This is complicated," he said, leaning back in his chair. "If these individuals are as dangerous as you say, simply ignoring them won't be enough." "What can we do?" Betty asked, her voice steady despite her anxiety. "You'll need leverage," Mr. Adewale replied. "Something that will make them think twice about coming after Chike or you. Do you have any proof of their activities?" Chike shook his head. "Most of it was kept secret, even from us. but I do remember locations, names, and a few dealings that could expose them. That might be enough, Mr. Adewale said. But it's a risky move. If they find out you're gathering evidence, it could escalate quickly. We don't have a choice, Betty said firmly. I won't live my life looking over my shoulder, and neither will Chike. Mr. Adewale nodded, impressed by her determination. Very well, I'll help you, but be careful. This isn't a game. As they left the lawyer's office, Chike looked at Betty with a mixture of admiration and fear. You're risking so much for me, he said. Betty smiled faintly. That's what you do for someone you care about, Chike. Now let's end this once and for all. Betty and Chike spent the following days gathering what little information they could on the Vanguard. Chike's former associates, who seemed determined to drag him back into their world. Betty's resolve was unwavering, though every conversation about the group added more weight to her heart. They spent late nights in the estate's study, Chike carefully recounting memories of names, faces, and places, while Betty typed everything into her laptop, trying to make sense of it all. The more they uncovered, the darker their situation became. There were rumors of a planned meeting, a hidden network of people still loyal to Chike's cause, and most terrifying of all, whispers of someone watching them. One evening, as Betty was leaving the study, she heard a faint sound outside the window, a soft tap like the rustle of a tree branch brushing against the glass. But when she looked out, there was nothing. Chike, who had been at her side, froze. We're being watched, he muttered, his voice tight with concern. Betty's breath caught in her throat. What do we do now? Keep acting normal. If they think we're onto them, it could get dangerous fast, Chike replied. He grabbed her hand, his grip tight. You're not safe here anymore. We need to leave the estate. Betty's heart raced. But where will we go? We have a safe house, hidden away in the city. It's the only place we'll be safe for now. Chike said, I can't risk putting you in any more danger. Betty hesitated, but then her instincts kicked in. The danger wasn't just looming, it was already at their doorstep. I trust you, she said, her voice steady. Let's go. They didn't waste any time. Packing only essentials, they slipped out of the estate under the cover of night, leaving behind the only life Betty had ever known. The safe house was located on the outskirts of the city, tucked away in a quiet, almost forgotten part of town. It was a small, nondescript house with security cameras, reinforced windows, and the kind of isolation that promised anonymity. Chike led Betty inside, closing the door behind them with a sense of finality. It's not much, but it's safe, he said, glancing around the room. Betty surveyed their new surroundings. There were no luxurious furnishings, no grand chandeliers, just bare walls and practical furniture. It was a stark contrast to the opulence of her former life. This will do, she said, trying to reassure herself. Chike pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages. I'm trying to get in touch with some old contacts who might know more about the Vanguard's next move. We can't let them think we've disappeared. Betty's anxiety flared up again. What if they find us here? Chike's eyes darkened. They won't. Not if we're careful. But Betty wasn't so sure. The weight of their situation was beginning to settle in. They were fugitives, running from a dangerous past that Chike had tried so desperately to leave behind. We can't keep running forever, Chike, Betty said quietly. We need to find a way to bring this to an end, once and for all. Chike's expression softened. I'm sorry. I never wanted to drag you into this. Betty placed a hand on his arm. We're in this together. You're not alone. But deep down, Betty knew that the danger they faced wasn't just about Chike's past. It was about her future, the life she had built, and the dream of love she had dared to believe in. Days passed in the safe house, but the constant tension never left Betty's chest. She hadn't realized how much she missed the comforts of her old life, the familiar luxury, the sense of security, the control she once had. Chike spent most of his time on the phone, talking in low voices with his contacts, trying to piece together the movements of the Vanguard. Betty did her best to help, but the more they uncovered, the clearer it became that they were running out of time. One afternoon, Chike received an urgent call from one of his old associates, a man named Daniel, who had been one of the most loyal members of the Vanguard. They found us, Chike said, his face pale as he hung up the phone. Betty stood up, her heart leaping into her throat. What does that mean? We have to move again. Chike replied, his voice strained. Daniel said they're closing in tonight. Betty felt a cold chill run down her spine. Who's coming for us, Chike? Someone I used to trust. Someone I never thought would betray me, Chike muttered bitterly. Daniel said the leader of the Vanguard, my old mentor, is here in the city, and he's looking for me. Betty's stomach turned. How do we stop them? We don't, Chike said, his voice heavy with regret. But we can make sure they don't find you. Chike, I'm not going anywhere without you, Betty said firmly. We face this together or not at all. Chike met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and fear. You're sure about this? I'm sure, Betty replied. We're in this together, remember? But as night fell and the first sounds of sirens echoed through the streets, Betty realized they were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their love and their future. The hours dragged on in the small, dimly lit safe house. Betty and Chike sat in tense silence, each of them grappling with their own thoughts. The news that Chike's old mentor had returned to the city sent a wave of fear through Betty, though she hid it behind a mask of resolve. She had chosen to stay with him. She wouldn't back down now. Chike's phone rang again. He answered it quickly, his face tightening as he listened. What do you mean? He's already here? He asked in disbelief. Where is he now? Betty watched as Chike's expression shifted from confusion to anger. He hung up abruptly, slamming the phone down onto the table. He's here, Betty, in the city. He's got eyes on us, Chike said, his voice heavy with dread. Betty felt a pang of fear in her chest. Is there anyone you can trust to help us now? Anyone who can stop him? Chike hesitated, then shook his head. I thought I could trust Daniel, but now I'm not so sure. If he's working with the Vanguard, we're in deeper trouble than I realized. Betty stood, her resolve growing stronger with every passing moment. We can't wait for things to get worse. We need to confront him, this mentor of yours, right now. Chike shot her a warning look. It's too dangerous, Betty. You don't understand what this man is capable of. He's not just any leader. He's the one who trained me. He knows how to destroy people. Betty met his gaze firmly. Then it's time you face him. We can't keep running forever, Chike. We need answers, and we need to put an end to this. Chike took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging under the weight of their situation. You're right. We don't have a choice. They spent the next few hours preparing for what was to come. Betty made sure to grab a small bag with essentials, while Chike gathered a few documents that might help them later. When the time came, they would need all the resources they could find. The moonlight filtered through the windows as the night settled around them. Their plan was simple. They would go to the location where Chike's mentor was rumored to be staying, confront him, and demand answers. But Betty couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. The city was quieter than usual as Betty and Chike drove through the winding streets, their nerves on edge. The air felt thick with anticipation. Chike, ever the strategist, kept his eyes on the road, but Betty could tell he was lost in thought, reliving his past with every turn. Where exactly are we going? Betty asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the uncertainty weighing down on her. To an old warehouse, Chike replied, his voice tight. It's where I last met with him. It's where he always liked to lay low. He knows the city like the back of his hand. Betty's heart skipped a beat. And you think he'll be there? I don't think. I know, Chike said, his eyes narrowing. He's always been predictable. He'll be waiting for me. The car slowed as they neared their destination, an industrial area at the edge of the city. A few dim streetlights cast long shadows over the abandoned buildings. The only sound was the soft hum of the engine as Chike parked the car behind a rusted metal fence. This is it, he said, turning off the engine. Betty took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. Are you sure we can't wait until we have more help? Chike looked at her with a sense of determination in his eyes. We've already waited too long. We either face him now, or we risk losing everything. They stepped out of the car, the night air biting at their skin. As they approached the warehouse, Betty could feel the tension building. Every creak of the old building, every shift in the shadows made her heart race. Then as they reached the door, it swung open, and there he stood, the man Chike had once called mentor. His tall figure loomed in the doorway, a smug smile on his face. Chike, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. I wondered how long it would take you to come crawling back. Betty's blood ran cold. Chike's face hardened as he stepped forward, his voice low and controlled. I didn't come to crawl. I came to end this. What you did, what you made me do, it's over. The man chuckled, stepping out of the shadows. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a hardened face that seemed to show no remorse. It's never over, Chike. You can't escape what you are, what we all are. Betty's eyes flicked between the two men, the tension palpable. What do you want from us? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man whom Chike had once called Captain ignored her. His gaze remained fixed on Chike. You think you can just walk away from everything you were? You think you can live some quiet life with her? He sneered. You were one of us, and you'll always be one of us. Chike's fists clenched. Not anymore. I'm not the same man I was, and I'm never going back to that life. Captain's eyes narrowed dangerously. You're fooling yourself. You always will be. The Vanguard doesn't let its own walk away, Chike, and I don't let traitors go unpunished. Betty took a step forward, her voice cutting through the charged atmosphere. You'll have to go through me first. And our captain's eyes flicked to Betty, his expression amused. You think you can stop me? You're just a rich girl who doesn't understand the real world. You don't know the danger you're in. Chike stepped between them, his voice cold and unwavering. She understands more than you think, and she's not going anywhere. Captain's smile faded as he realized Chike wasn't backing down. We'll see about that. The confrontation escalated in an instant, each word, each movement, carrying the weight of betrayal and broken promises. Betty's heart raced as the man reached into his coat pocket and Chike took a defensive stance. The stakes had just been raised higher than ever. The tension in the warehouse was suffocating, pressing down on them like an invisible force. Captain's hand hovered near his coat pocket, and Chike instinctively positioned himself between Betty and the man who had once been his mentor. Betty's pulse quickened, but she stood her ground. She had come too far to back down now. Chike, Captain sneered, you've always been the idealist, thought you could outrun your past. But it always catches up, doesn't it? Your so-called new life with her, it's a joke. Betty's heart thudded in her chest. What do you want from us? She demanded, struggling to steady her voice. Why are you doing this? Captain's smile twisted into something darker as he pulled a small gleaming knife from his coat. It's not about what I want, girl. It's about what Chike deserves. He thinks he can just walk away from the Vanguard, but the Vanguard doesn't let people walk away. Chike's hands balled into fists. I'm not afraid of you, Captain. You'll never control me again. Captain's eyes glinted with malice. You never had control, Chike. You were always just a pawn. You've been playing your little game of redemption, thinking you could have a normal life. But there are no normal lives for people like you. People like us. Betty stepped forward. No. Chike is not like you. He's changed. Captain's gaze flicked to her, amused. Changed? How cute. The rich girl thinks she can save him. You're all the same. You'll never understand what it takes to survive in the world we came from. The tension between them thickened, the standoff becoming ever more dangerous. Chike didn't flinch. I've lived through enough of your darkness, Captain. I won't go back. Captain's grin twisted further. Then you'll die for it. Before Chike could react, Captain lunged forward, his knife flashing in the dim light. But Chike was faster. With a swift motion, he grabbed Captain's wrist, twisting it until the knife clattered to the ground. Betty gasped, but Chike wasn't done. With raw fury in his eyes, he shoved Captain back, sending him crashing to the cold concrete floor. You think you can threaten us? Chike's voice was low and dangerous. You don't scare me anymore. For a moment, Captain lay still, seemingly defeated. But then, a low chuckle rumbled from his chest. You're so naive, Chike. You think this is over? It's just beginning. Betty's instincts screamed at her to run, but Chike held her back, his eyes fixed on Captain. What do you mean? Betty demanded. What is this really about? Captain's smile returned, colder than before. You think you've escaped? You're both tangled in a game far bigger than you can understand. The Vanguard doesn't let its members go, alive or dead. Sure. Here's the rewritten passage as requested. Before Chike could respond, there was a loud crash from the back of the warehouse. A figure emerged from the shadows, another man, tall and broad, with eyes full of malice. Captain's voice grew cold. "You really thought you could take me down alone?" The newcomer stepped forward, a dark figure in the dim light. "You should have stayed in hiding, Chike. Now, there's no way out." Chike's face paled, but his grip on Betty tightened. "We need to move. Now." Betty's heart hammered in her chest as the two men advanced. The stakes had just become even higher. Chike and Betty were trapped, surrounded by people from Chike's past, people who wouldn't hesitate to kill them both. The warehouse had become a battleground, the tension palpable in the air. Betty could feel the cold sweat on her palms as she looked around, desperately searching for a way out. The two men, Captain and his mysterious associate, were circling them, waiting for the right moment to strike. Chike's breath was steady, but his eyes flicked between the men, calculating his next move. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. "They're not here for a negotiation, Betty," Chike whispered, his voice tense. "They want us gone, dead or alive." Betty's pulse quickened. "How did it get to this point, Chike? What did you do?" Chike's jaw clenched. "I was too young, too naive. I got involved with the wrong people. I wanted power, wanted respect, and I got it, until it all came crashing down. But I'm done with them. I just didn't think they'd come after me this hard." The new man in the warehouse smirked. "You should have thought about that before betraying us. You were one of our best, Chike. You made us all a lot of money, and now you think you can walk away?" Chike's eyes narrowed. "I made my choice. Now you'll make yours." Betty could feel the tension in Chike's muscles as he moved to stand in front of her. He wasn't just fighting for his life now. He was fighting for her too. Captain, recovering from the earlier blow, got to his feet, wiping blood from his lip. "This isn't over. You think you can take us both down? You're not as strong as you used to be, Chike." With a swift move, Chike lunged at Captain, but the second man intercepted him, knocking him to the ground. Betty gasped as she saw Chike struggle, but she didn't have time to think. Her survival instincts kicked in. She grabbed a nearby metal pipe and swung it at the second man, knocking him back. "Get off him!" she shouted. The second man hissed in pain, but before he could retaliate, Chike was back on his feet. The fight intensified. Betty's hands shook as she watched Chike fend off the men, every blow full of desperation and rage. She couldn't believe this was happening. "Chike, we need to go," she screamed. But it was too late. Captain grabbed Chike from behind, pulling him into a chokehold. The pressure was suffocating, and Chike's vision blurred. Betty's heart raced as she rushed to his side, but Captain's associate pulled her away, slamming her into the wall. "Stay out of this, rich girl," he sneered. Chike's struggle intensified. He managed to free himself, delivering a powerful blow to Captain's face. The older man staggered back, and in that moment, Chike took control. Betty's breath caught in her throat as Chike stood tall, victorious for now, but barely. His chest heaved with exhaustion, and his face was bruised. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice hoarse. But as they turned to flee, they heard sirens in the distance. The law was coming. The sound of sirens blared in the distance, growing louder by the second. Betty's heart raced as she exchanged a frantic look with Chike. The authorities were closing in, and there was no time to waste. "We need to move. Now!" Chike's voice was urgent as he grabbed Betty's hand and pulled her toward the back of the warehouse. The two of them ran through the dimly lit corridors, their footsteps echoing off the cold concrete. Behind them, they could hear Captain and his associate recovering, shouting threats as they scrambled to their feet. Chike's grip tightened around Betty's wrist. "Keep up, Betty. We can't let them catch us." Betty stumbled slightly, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her mind raced, torn between fear and the instinct to protect Chike. She could feel the weight of everything crashing down on them. If they didn't get away, everything they'd fought for would be lost. As they reached the back exit, Chike kicked open a metal door, and they were greeted by the cold night air. They emerged into an alleyway, and Chike immediately scanned their surroundings. "This way," he muttered, leading her toward a narrow side street. They moved swiftly, but every step felt like it might be their last. Betty could hear the sound of tires screeching behind them, and she glanced over her shoulder to see a black SUV speeding toward them. "They're coming," Betty gasped. "We won't outrun them on foot." Chike didn't hesitate. He pulled her toward a small, rundown car parked along the street. "Get in," he ordered. They jumped into the car, and Chike quickly started the engine, throwing the car into gear just as the SUV screeched to a halt behind them. "Hold on," Chike shouted as he slammed his foot on the gas. The car surged forward, speeding through the narrow streets of the city. Betty's heart hammered in her chest as she gripped the seat, the sound of the SUV's engine growing louder behind them. She could hear the faint echoes of gunfire in the distance. The stakes had just gone from dangerous to life-threatening. "Do you know where we're going?" Betty asked, her voice trembling as the city blurred by. Chike's eyes were focused on the road, his knuckles white as he gripped the wheel. "I have a place, a safe house on the outskirts of the city. It's the only place we'll be able to lay low for a while." Betty nodded, though every nerve in her body was on edge. The chase was far from over. As they swerved through the streets, Chike kept glancing in the rearview mirror. The SUV was still behind them, relentlessly pursuing. It wasn't just the authorities chasing them, it was the ghosts of Chike's past. "We can't keep running forever," Betty said, trying to catch her breath. "We need to end this, Chike. You need to confront them once and for all." Chike's jaw tightened, his gaze never leaving the road. "I will, but we have to survive long enough to make it happen. We can't do it if they catch us now." After what felt like an eternity of weaving through alleyways and back streets, Chike finally took a sharp turn off the main road. The sound of the SUV's engine grew fainter as they drove deeper into a forested area. Betty let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The adrenaline coursing through her veins was starting to ebb, but the fear was still there. They weren't safe. Not yet. Chike pulled up to a small cabin hidden deep within the woods, its windows dark, giving off an air of secrecy. He killed the engine and immediately got out of the car, scanning their surroundings. "We're not out of the woods yet," Chike muttered. "They could be following us. Stay close, Betty." Betty nodded, her heart still racing. She followed him up the steps of the cabin, trying to steady herself. The events of the past few days had completely shattered any sense of normalcy she had left. Inside, the cabin was bare but functional. There were no frills, just a few pieces of old furniture and a large metal safe in the corner. Chike went straight to the safe and began punching in a code. Betty's curiosity got the best of her. "What's in there?" she asked, glancing at the safe. Chike didn't answer immediately, but after a moment he opened the safe and pulled out a small, well-worn box. He looked at it for a long time before handing it to her. "This," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is my past, the real reason I left the Vanguard." Betty took the box in her hands, feeling the weight of it. She opened it carefully, revealing several documents, photographs, and a small envelope. Inside the envelope was a letter that seemed to hold the answers to everything. Chike watched her as she read the letter, his eyes shadowed with regret. "It's about the mission," Betty whispered, her eyes wide with realization. "The mission that went wrong. The one that you're running from." Chike nodded, his face grim. "The Vanguard doesn't forget, Betty. They won't stop until they've destroyed everything I've built. And now, because of me, they'll come for you too." Betty's heart sank as she looked at Chike, the weight of his confession settling in. They weren't just running from a criminal organization. They were fighting for their lives, and the fight had only just begun. The cabin was silent, save for the crackling of the small fireplace. Betty sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of the documents Chike had given her pressing on her chest. The truth was unfolding before her eyes in ways she hadn't anticipated. The letter in her hands confirmed everything she'd feared about Chike's past. The Vanguard wasn't just a criminal group. It was a network that spanned continents, touching every corner of society. And now, Betty was caught in the crossfire. Chike paced across the room, his mind racing. He had known the day would come when the Vanguard would find him, but he'd hoped, prayed, that it would be later. Not now, not when he had everything he'd ever wanted, Betty. "We don't have much time," Chike said, stopping in front of the window, peering out into the forest. "They'll be here soon, and when they arrive, they won't just take me. They'll come for everything, Betty. They'll burn it all down." Betty's voice was steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Then we'll fight. Together." Chike turned to her, his eyes flickering with both appreciation and sorrow. You don't understand, Betty. This is bigger than you or me. The Vanguard doesn't just let people go. They're merciless. Betty stood up, walking toward him. I've seen what you've sacrificed for me. I won't let you fight this battle alone. You can't keep running. Chike reached out, gripping her shoulders firmly. I don't want you to get hurt. You don't deserve this. But if we don't act now, if we don't prepare... His voice trailed off, the fear creeping into his chest. Betty's eyes softened. We'll find a way. I believe in you, Chike. We'll end this together. Chike hesitated, then nodded, his resolve firming. All right, but we need to gather as much information as we can. If we're going to make our move, we need to know where the Vanguard is hiding, and we need a way out. They both turned toward the small desk in the corner where the documents Chike had kept in the safe lay. Betty picked up the top file, flipping through it with determination. It was a map, one that tracked key locations where the Vanguard operated. This is it, Betty said, her voice sharp. This is where we hit them. We take out the network from within. We cut off their supply lines, their safe houses. Chike walked over, looking at the map. It's dangerous, but it's the only way. They spent the next few hours strategizing, working through the night to plan their attack. Chike's past had finally caught up with him, and now it was time to face it head on. Betty was no longer just a bystander. She was fully in it now, and nothing would stop her from standing by Chike. As dawn approached, they packed what little they could, preparing for the fight of their lives. Chike loaded his bag with weapons and other supplies, while Betty carefully folded the documents, securing them in her jacket. Are you ready? Chike asked, his tone low but filled with a quiet resolve. Betty nodded, her face set in determination. Let's end this. The small, secluded cabin felt like a distant memory as Chike and Betty drove through the winding roads toward their target. The plan had been set in motion, and now there was no turning back. They were about to confront the very people who had haunted Chike's past for years. The Vanguard had made their move, and now Chike and Betty were about to make theirs. You sure about this? Betty asked, her voice cutting through the tension in the car. Chike didn't look at her. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. We don't have a choice. If we don't stop them here, they'll keep coming for us, forever. Betty's eyes were fixed on the road ahead, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. She had never imagined she'd be in a situation like this. Yet, she didn't regret a single moment of the journey that had brought her here. As they neared the final location on the map, a large, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, Chike slowed the car, bringing it to a stop behind a thicket of trees. The place was dark, quiet, but they both knew that silence was just the calm before the storm. They crept through the shadows, moving like ghosts toward the building. Chike's mind was already racing, assessing every possible outcome. The Vanguard was inside, waiting for them. He could feel it. We go in fast and hard, Chike whispered, his breath shallow. No hesitation. We take out their security first, then make our way to the main room. We take out everyone inside and destroy their records. This ends tonight. Betty nodded, her jaw set in a determined line. She wasn't going to let Chike face this alone, not again. They approached the side entrance, and Chike motioned for Betty to stay close. He gently pushed the door open, peering inside. The warehouse was eerily quiet, but Chike's instincts told him that they were being watched. He could feel eyes on them as they moved deeper into the shadows. Suddenly, a shot rang out. Chike shoved Betty to the ground just as the bullet whizzed past them, narrowly missing. Get down! Chike yelled. A group of armed men emerged from the shadows, blocking their exit. You're not getting away this time, Chike, one of them sneered, his gun aimed directly at them. Betty's pulse raced, but she refused to be afraid. She could see the determination in Chike's eyes. He wasn't going to let them take him down. Not now, not ever. We're not going down without a fight, Chike growled, his voice low and dangerous. And with that, the final battle began. The sound of gunfire echoed in the dimly lit warehouse as Betty and Chike fought with everything they had. The odds were against them. The Vanguard's men were well armed, and the building's shadows seemed to be filled with enemies at every turn. But Chike wasn't willing to back down. He moved swiftly, efficiently, taking down one attacker after another, while Betty, her heart pounding, kept up as best as she could. Despite the violence surrounding them, Chike's mind was focused on one thing: survival. Every move he made was calculated, every decision a life or death choice. Betty's presence was a comfort, but also a constant reminder of the weight of his past. She didn't deserve this. "We have to finish this," Chike muttered, his breath heavy as he ducked behind a crate. "We can't leave any loose ends." Betty nodded, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. She knew the risk, knew that each second spent here could be their last. But there was no turning back now. The sound of footsteps alerted them to more approaching enemies. They moved again, weaving through the chaos. But in the middle of it all, something shifted. The fight didn't feel like it was just for survival anymore. It was for redemption. After what felt like hours of relentless fighting, the warehouse grew eerily silent. Chike stood over the final man, his breath ragged and heavy. The bodies of the Vanguard's men lay scattered around them, and the air smelled of gunpowder and blood. Betty, though shaken, remained by his side, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and relief. "We did it," Betty whispered, her voice hoarse. Chike didn't reply immediately. He stood still, surveying the wreckage. His heart was racing, but not with triumph. There was no joy in this victory. The finality of it all weighed heavily on him. The Vanguard was gone, their network shattered. But at what cost? As the last of the men was secured, Betty placed a gentle hand on Chike's shoulder. "You can't run anymore, Chike. We can't go back to how things were before." Chike nodded, his eyes somber. "I know. This is it, Betty. There's no going back now." They stood there for a moment, taking in the magnitude of what they'd done. But it wasn't just the end of the Vanguard. It was the end of the life Chike had known. No longer could he hide behind lies or false identities. The truth had been exposed. The man he used to be was gone, replaced by someone new. Someone who would face the consequences of his actions. The authorities arrived shortly after, and Betty and Chike were taken into custody. The aftermath of their actions would be felt far and wide, and their fate was uncertain. What had started as a desperate attempt to survive had now turned into a public spectacle. Chike sat in a cold interrogation room, his hands cuffed to the table. His mind raced with questions about the future, about what would happen to him now that his past had caught up with him in such a destructive way. He had fought for so long to protect Betty, to keep her safe from his world. But now, there was no hiding. A police officer walked in, his face unreadable. "We've got a lot to talk about, Chike. You've made quite a mess. This should be exactly what you asked for." Chike's eyes flickered with defiance, but there was also a hint of exhaustion. "I know what I did, and I'll face whatever comes next. But there's more to the story than you know." Betty was brought in shortly after, sitting across from Chike. She had been through her own interrogation, and though she was shaken, there was a certain calm in her demeanor. "I'm not leaving him," Betty said firmly to the officers. "Whatever happens, we're in this together." Chike turned to her, his heart swelling with emotion despite the circumstances. She had stood by him through it all, through the lies, the betrayals, and the danger. She was his rock. Days passed, and the news of the showdown at the warehouse made headlines across the country. Chike and Betty became the subjects of media frenzy. While some saw them as heroes for taking down the Vanguard, others questioned their motives, and still, some blamed them for the destruction that followed. The world was watching, and the pressure was mounting. Chike had expected some form of justice, perhaps a sentence, perhaps prison time. But the response from the public was more complicated than that. They were heroes, but heroes with a dark past, and the line between justice and revenge was thin. "I didn't do this for fame," Chike said one evening, as he sat across from Betty in the small apartment they were temporarily staying in. "I didn't do it for anyone but you." Betty's eyes softened. "I know, Chike, but we both have to face the reality now. The world knows who you are, and no matter how much we wish it were different, we can't change the past." Chike looked down at his hands, as if searching for something he couldn't find. The weight of his choices hung over him, and for the first time in a long time, he felt truly alone. But Betty's voice broke through his thoughts. "We've both made mistakes, but I believe in second chances. I believe in redemption." Chike's gaze lifted to meet hers. "Do you think I can be redeemed?" Betty's answer was simple, yet filled with conviction. I believe in us, Chike. I believe in you. The future was uncertain. They didn't know what the coming days would bring or how they would face the consequences of their actions. But one thing was clear. Betty and Chike were in this together, and no matter what happened, they would find a way to move forward. For better or worse, they had both chosen this path, and now they would face it together. Dear amazing viewers, thank you so much for taking the time to watch The Gatekeeper's Secret, Love, Betrayal, and Shocking Revelations. Your support means the world to us, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey of storytelling. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on more captivating tales like this. There's so much more in store. Thrilling adventures, heartfelt lessons, and unforgettable characters await. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. What part of the story moved you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And if you think someone else would enjoy this tale, please feel free to share it with them. Thank you once again for your love and support. We can't wait to see you in our next story.